This is Beckett's Talk, and thank you for joining us. One of the things I love about doing these podcasts is I get to talk to a lot of different people about a lot of different things, learn some stuff, find out about what's going on. And having been in the media in this town for a long time, I'm always amazed. I'm pretty well connected in town, but I'm always amazed. I'm always finding out there's things going on in this city that the average person knows nothing about, has no idea. And this is one of those things. I'm talking to Dr. Gina Ligon, right? Pronounce
That's
it right?
right, yeah.
Dr. Gina Ligon. She's with NCITE.
That's right.
NCITE, which is it a department at UNO? What is it? It's
Yeah, it's interesting. We're a center is what we're called. We're in the Center for Collaboration Science, which is supposed to be this interdisciplinary center across all the colleges at UNO.
Okay, so let's start right away then with what NCITE stands for, because that's an acronym.
Yeah. National Counterterrorism Innovation, Technology, and Education Center, which NCITE is enough. Just call it NCITE.
Omaha has been active in the terrorism business. I didn't say the terrorism business, like long before 9/11. I mean, when 9/11 happened, George Bush came to Omaha.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, so we've been actively doing this mostly through Offutt, but you're not through Offutt, right?
That's right. Yeah, we're actually sponsored by Department of Homeland Security. Okay. So we're the only academic center of excellence designated to study terrorism prevention and counterterrorism in the United States.
How do you study terrorism?
Well, it's interesting. You don't get a degree in the study of terrorism. Really, it's every degree applying their own lens to the study of terrorism. So, like, we have communications majors looking at their rhetoric and how they influence online. We have IT people looking at different gaming-adjacent platforms and how they're used to recruit young people to join terrorist groups. And so it really is your methodological lens to understand the nature of violent extremists in the United States.
Now, you're not actually, like, doing research, like, going in there to try to find terrorists. Or are you? Are you going?
Yeah, I mean, we have some teams that do what's called ethnographic research. So they embed with different terrorist groups and participate and study them, go to their meetings, understand, how they leave. That's one of the questions we're really interested in, is how people exit a terrorist group, how they get out of them. And so they've followed terrorist members and seeing their trajectory of how they were in it and active versus how they disengage or de-radicalize.
Oh, I've got so many questions. Okay. What is it? Is there a common thread about how somebody gets involved in a terrorist organization, terrorist group?
Yeah, unfortunately, no. There's no profile of who's likely to become a terrorist. But we do know a lot about sort of the risk factors that could make someone more susceptible to being recruited. And it's honestly a lot of the same risk factors for getting involved in other types of crime, like gangs. It's looking for meaning, looking for group membership. Some of them join looking for adventure and excitement. So you look at some of the recruiting materials and they're all about the excitement of it.
So it might be about just getting a rush and not necessarily because they believe in some ideology.
Yeah, usually the ideology comes second.
Really?
Joining the group comes first. And then they get indoctrinated with the belief system. So the reasons why they join are not necessarily the reasons they stay. And so staying oftentimes is they become true believers or engrossed in sort of the doctrine or ideology.
Can you get out of a terrorist group once you're in? I would think it's like the mob, It'd be like, if you get out of it, they come looking for you.
Yeah, it's hard. Some people have even likened it to drug addiction because it's like, you get so used to consuming the propaganda and all of your associations are in it. Because one of the things they do is they try to isolate you from your former group memberships and people that were in your family before. So then you get out and you don't have anyone to be around or spend time with. And so it's really difficult to get out once you're in.
So what you're saying is, as I hear you at least, is that it's not dissimilar to somebody that joins a cult, right? And only these cults want violence. They want to disrupt. They want to terrorize. Whereas somebody else, some other cult might be a religious cult or just try to get you into multi-level marketing or something, right? I mean, these are people that just go and are they loners? Are they?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've been looking at this whole notion of something called a managed ecosystem in the United States, which is where you have kind of this centralized group that's putting out the propaganda and sort of setting forth the direction, but then you have these individuals who are more likely to be the actors to engage in violence. And so they're consuming it online. And so they feel like they're part of something bigger than they are, but they're not actually interacting with the headquarters, if you will, in a meaningful way. And so that's where you get that whole term of a lone actor or lone wolf.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how do you determine that this is a terrorist act versus just some, mass shooter?
Yeah, it's hard. There's legal definitions, right? And so most mass casualty attacks are investigated like they're terrorist attacks until they can determine that they're not. And that part of that is because if you were inspired by a foreign terrorist organization or ideology, then that opens up a whole bunch of legal authorities for investigators to use. Versus if you were just someone who was a workplace violence mass casualty, you don't have all the same investigative sort of supports.
Okay, and that's sometimes just you find that out through the investigation, which they're doing right now about the shooter that attempted to assassinate former President Trump.
Yeah.
Are you involved in that in any way to try to find out, what would cause him to do something like this?
Yeah. In fact, I think the Monday after it happened, we got an RFI, request for information from the Department of Homeland Security about all the projects we were doing related to threats to public officials and assassination attempts by terrorist groups. And so our research was used immediately, like right after that happened. It was really exciting for us to feel like, as an academic, you're used to doing stuff that no one really studies or reads about for a long time. And so it felt like we were being useful and relevant.
Can you tell me what you found from this? I mean, what you sent them, or like the information that you had sent to
so part of it was we're not investigators, right? So it's not like I was looking at Thomas Crooks's social media. However, we are looking at patterns of people that threaten public officials. For example, elected officials, election officials, and what their kind of motivations are and what their ideologies are and what some of their social media footprints look like. And so that's part of it, was to try to help them see, like, does he match what we think? And there's 4 different kinds of domestic violent extremists who we're really worried about. One of them is something called the anti-government, anti-authority violent extremist. They call it AGAVE, which is a terrible acronym, but it's an anti-government, anti-authority, and those are the ones that are very likely to want to attack like a political figure of significance. And we thought, does his social media match any of what these previous shooters or attackers have looked like?
Now, the media would have you believe that as far as, right-wing terrorist groups are much more of a threat even than foreign terrorist groups right now. What about left-wing terrorist groups? I mean, are they as big a threat too, or are the right-wing people angrier now than the left-wing?
Yeah, so I mean, let me just say, our threats to public officials, you have threats both from the left and the right. So it's kind of equal opportunity, just angry at people who are in elected positions. We also have a project on conspiracy theories around the election. And what's really interesting is if your candidate loses, there's a small section of individuals who also might believe that there was a conspiracy theory around your candidate losing, no matter what side you're on.
Yeah.
So I think our research would say the most lethal threat in the United States are what's called a RIMV, racially and ethically motivated violent extremists, white supremacists. They kill the most people in the U.S. right now. However, there are threats that are anti-government on both sides of the political spectrum. And so it's really much more about sort of that violence against authority. And that kind of is an appealing narrative to a lot of different types of individuals, regardless of their political leaning.
That would be the January 6th rioters.
Yeah, January 6th. But you also have some, honestly, anti-capitalist as part of that as well. And so when they call it AGAVE, they're saying anti-government, anti-authority. And authority could mean corporate America. And so that is where you get the range of ideological beliefs that are really against that kind of power structure.
But there's a difference between, putting red paint on a woman wearing fur than, trying to overthrow the government. I mean, there are degrees of terrorism then, right?
Yeah. So, and actually there's kind of debate among terrorism researchers. Should we only be calling terrorism when it's about death or destruction of people, loss of human life? Or should the definition of terrorism also include destruction of property? And for us at NCITE, we're Department of Homeland Security Center, so we're looking at any kind of ideological or politically motivated violence that's criminal in nature, particularly against critical infrastructure sectors. So that could be destruction. So you think about what it would mean for an economic disruption if someone were to derail a Union Pacific rail car, right? And so that could be an act of anti-authority violent extremism that might not kill anyone, but it would be considered, at least by academics, an act of terrorism because it's destruction of property.
The situation of the bridge in Baltimore, where the barge went and knocked down the bridge, there were people there that thought that was a terrorist attack,
when it
right?
happened, I mean, all of us, terrorism researchers across the country, were all watching that to see, like, is this it? Is this an attack that would cause the kind of critical infrastructure and loss of life that could, like, really lead to that loss of trust in civil institutions?
That is something that, when something bad like that happens, anymore, that is your first thought.
That's probably always been my first thought. When I see that, my first instinct is to always think about, but it's the same thing when I go to public events. I always look for the exit. I always, crowded events are terrorist targets.
Okay, but
for me.
have we become too paranoid for stuff like that?
I don't know if it's paranoid. It's just being prepared.
Yeah. Okay. No. But I always thought, whenever I go to a play at the Orpheum or something, and they say, okay, now before you relax and enjoy the play, watch out. There could be evil all around you.
Yeah.
Find the exits.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I want to be naive.
Yeah.
When it comes to that, how real are the threats? I mean, as far as that goes, how bad is it out there?
I think Americans would feel a lot more faith in law enforcement and our government if they knew just how many terrorist attacks have been stopped. And that's what I feel like a lot of lay people don't realize is how many are thwarted before they occur, before they make it to the news. And so I don't, it's a rare low base rate event, but there are a lot of people that have been inspired by these violent extremist ideologies in our midst, and honestly, a lot of soft targets around that they could attack.
You say that are thwarted, but aren't you innocent until proven guilty? I mean, how do you stop a potential terrorist threat attack?
I mean, interestingly, a lot of them, there's something called suspicious activity reporting. So you've heard about the see something, say something. So there's these different behaviors that have been linked to plotting a terrorist attack. And so when you get a number of those kind of hitting or people reporting those, and it really is local citizens, because we're the ones that are going to be in the best position to be able to see something amiss. And so being able to put enough of those together that might be able to help law enforcement to get ahead of it before it happens.
And then the question is if law enforcement does it because people saw the shooter against with Donald Trump. Yeah.
And that was, Secret Service, we always talk about, they have a zero fail mission. They're part of Homeland Security. So we actually work with them quite a bit on something called behavioral threat assessment. And this is what they do when they put together these interdisciplinary teams to look at things to stop like school shootings and workplace violence. And so they have a zero fail mission. Like they can never fail at their job. Yeah. I mean, so few of us have that. And they failed that day.
Yeah. UNO also has the Center for Afghan Studies, which was a big part after 9/11. Are you affiliated with them in any way? Do you work with them in any way? Is that all part of the same Homeland Security?
Yeah, they're in their own center. They do a lot of really important work with resilience building for the Afghan community and Afghan refugees. So it's a little bit different than what we're doing. What we have collaborated with them on, there's a brilliant researcher there, Shirjan, who's the director, and in sort of understanding the terrorist group landscape in northern Afghanistan and where different elements of ISIS-K or the Taliban are. So he's been really instrumental in sort of helping give us that local expertise. Now, they don't really have any desires to hurt the U.S. right now. So that's, our mission is really focused on terrorist groups to the U.S. And so Afghanistan right now, at least Taliban groups that he has expertise in, doesn't really have its sights on us.
Really? Okay. Yeah. Well, that's good to know. I remember hearing someone from Gallup shortly after 9/11 talking about how while everybody was saying all these terrorists hate us because we have blue jeans and rock and roll music and our women didn't wear short skirts, that's why they hate us. But the reality was, according to Gallup at least, to the speaker from Gallup, was that the terrorists hated us because we were in their land. We were in their country. We were not letting them live their lives, I guess. Have you found that to be the case, or what?
I mean, one of the things that one of our teams is looking at is terrorist rhetoric and how they influence people. And they are very good at tying what we call local grievances to global problems, right? And so exactly what you're saying, like if you as a young individual are upset that there's an American or Western coalition force occupying your land, they can tie that particular grievance. Well, the reason why you're upset is because of this group over here. We saw the same thing with like water shortages in Yemen, for example. Like they tied why you're out of water is because the West is not letting us get our water. And so what's interesting to me is seeing how, this is why I was saying joining the group comes first and then you get indoctrinated after. And part of it is because they're good at tying like what is immediately bothersome to you to some, grander grievance.
You say that the Taliban isn't after us right now. What about Hamas or Hezbollah? Are they targeting Americans?
Yeah, we have a project coming out this next year about Hamas in the U.S., which is really interesting to see all the court cases of individuals in the United States who have ties to Hamas that have been prosecuted by the U.S. federal court system. And I think Americans will be shocked to see how many there are.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you don't think about that, these sleeper cell concepts, but, the court data would show that there are more of them who have been in the United States. And a lot of times they're engaged in fundraising. But yeah, grievances toward the West and what's happening right now with Israel is not helping.
Yeah.
We were looking at the two leaders that were just assassinated in the last couple days from Israeli forces. And it's amazing to see like how that will escalate the tensions in that region.
Stuff like that makes it easier for these terrorist groups to recruit, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think a lot of the footage that we're watching, they're very good at propaganda. They win the propaganda war in many ways because they don't have the same constraints that we have on us. And so a lot of the videos that they put out of showing these horrible atrocities that are happening are great for recruitment. We saw that with Assad in Syria. That's how ISIS sort of came to be as well. They showed a lot of the videos that Assad was doing to Syrian people. And that was very important for recruiting those young military-age males who may have lost someone, to a drone strike or some other horrible atrocity.
Now, we're talking about like these groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and Taliban. What about like Russia and China, and for that matter, Iran? State-sponsored. Would they be terrorists, or is that a different situation? Is that an act of war? That's not terrorism? What are the definitions there?
Yeah, so the way I study it as an academic is really looking at ideologically motivated, so belief-based terrorist groups, right? So not financially motivated. People ask me the same thing about like gangs or cyber criminals. We're really interested in people that are interested in pursuing acts of violence because of their beliefs or ideology. So what Russia has been very good at is co-opting some of those groups to do things on behalf of them as a state, a nation, but being able to leverage their ideological grievance to do so. And so it's a gray line. Like you can never attribute it back to Russia, but when you see these groups who have been consuming this propaganda and ideologically motivated, Russia can just kind of point them in our direction.
Would Russian planes buzzing Alaska, would that be considered terrorism? I mean, no damage was done, but they're trying to frighten people, right? And that's terrorism, isn't it?
I mean, that's a nation state, right? So that's a little different. So again, we're only looking at individuals or non-nation states who are motivated to act in an act of violence for a political belief. So not necessarily governments fighting with each other. Now, what they may be doing is terroristic, but they're not necessarily a terrorist.
Okay. How do you sleep at night?
I know.
Let me ask you this. I don't want to get into like technology and everything and how this all affects it, but how did you get into this? How did you get into this study?
Yeah, so I'm from Oklahoma originally, and I was in high school when the Oklahoma City bombing happened. And that was a formative event for everyone growing up in my state, probably in Nebraska too.
Well, yeah, because we were actually
one of the spots
they were looking at.
Yeah. And so you had a federal building too that he looked at, and it could have just as easily happened here. And I think it was so confusing at the time as a teenager, but and then get into a place where I could try to understand how people could act so violently to kill innocent people that were just symbols of who he hated, was really interesting to me as a psychologist. So I'm an organizational psychologist, so I look at how people organize around a psychology. And so that to me has been sort of my life's work, is understanding how do people kind of get groups of people to move on behalf of some belief, and in violent ways for this particular purpose.
Wow. Okay, so you say your husband military, and he was retired out of office, right?
He did, yeah.
So that's how you wound up in Omaha. How did NCITE end up in Omaha? Did NCITE end up in Omaha because you were here, or did you just happen to be here when they built NCITE?
I love that you asked that question, because that means that we've kind of made it, right? Like, we're an institution. So 5 years ago, there was a call for proposals from Department of Homeland Security to become the next Center of Excellence for Terrorism Prevention and Counterterrorism Research. And we at University of Nebraska Omaha decided to go for it. And there were 64 universities that competed, 9 that made it to the finals, 2 that got a site visit, us at University of Maryland. And they came out to Omaha. It was December of 2019, and it was a whole state show of force. Like, Governor Ricketts came, the head of our Secret Service came at the time. Just a ton of people from Nebraska came out and said, we want this in the middle of the country. Like, the Beltway needs to hear from Nebraskans around what it means to counter terrorism in the middle of the country. So we were able to kind of tell that story to DC of, give us a chance and we will show you how to build something great for the nation right here in the middle of the country. So that was, and we found out we won February 20th of 2020, and I've been going strong ever since.
Wonderful. How many people in the...
Oh, gosh. So, okay, I'm going to give you some stats. Are you ready?
Okay, I got mine. All right, take this.
So in Omaha, when I look at the listserv of people who are funded by this grant, so this is a grant from Department of Homeland Security, so no state dollars, it's all federal. There are 93 people on that listserv just in Omaha alone. Now, that doesn't mean they're all full-time. Some are part-time students, for example, but 93 people here. When I look at we were asked to form a national consortium. So we have 60 universities across the United States, some actual international partners as well, who also receive funding from us. In that group, we have 432 faculty and students who are all part of this consortium. And so I can legitimately tell you it's the largest academic center studying terrorism in the United States.
Really?
Yeah.
It's very cool.
It's really cool.
No,
I'm very proud
cool,
of it.
Well,
very
that's
proud
what
of it.
People don't understand some of the things that go on here in this city, because there's so much, whether it be government, whether it be military, whether it be business, the arts. There's so much that goes on in this city, and it's one of the things I love about Omaha.
Me too.
It's just sort of a underestimated, I think, sometimes. People don't understand just
and
how
really
cool this is.
the national security footprint here is really important, right?
Mm-hmm.
Having, like you mentioned, U.S. Strategic Command. I mean, that's a combatant command for Department of Defense. To have a university who's so focused on sort of national security research, whether it be UNMC and the Global Center for Health Security, whether it be INR, the Institute for Ag and Natural Resources, they have a whole section studied to, like, how do you protect farms and agriculture. So just really, really cool things going on in our state around, like, national security issues.
You mentioned agriculture just now, made me think of this. I mean, obviously our water and food supply would be terrorist targets.
Mm-hmm.
We think about, like, tall buildings in the cities, but that actually is terrorist targets as well, right?
Yeah, and back in early 2000, Al-Qaeda actually talked about wanting to hit us in our agriculture system, our food supply chain. And so and maybe before then, but ever since then, it's been on the radar of national security folks of like, wow, this is actually a target that they would want to hit, and what that would do to us. I think about it honestly because of all the precision tech that's going on with ag right now. When you hear about all of the different technological innovations that help us with resourcing, help us with like fertilizing our crops and watering things, I worry about the architecture and how vulnerable that could be to cyber attack as well.
Let's talk about cyber attacks, okay? Because that's something that I think everybody worries about. I just saw, I think, a blood bank in the southeast, like 350 blood banks are, got hit. And I used to work for a TV station here in town, different TV station that got hit with a cyber attack and was basically knocked out 200 and some odd stations or so. So the cyber attacks are a real thing. How do you prevent that? How do you find those people that are doing that? Because a lot of times that's just somebody, or at least I assume, could be just somebody, in their mom's basement, trying to get Bitcoin from people, what can be done to prevent that?
Yeah, so we actually have a request for proposals out right now. So I think it'll be out at the time that this goes live, which is, maybe you can link to it. But we're trying to recruit the best academic researchers to look at ideologically motivated cyber attacks. So when a terrorist actor might want to attack the cyber domain that is attached to different parts of critical infrastructure. So let's think about like stadium security, right? So there were a couple college stadiums 2 years ago where the Jumbotron got taken over during a game when had anti-Semitic messaging on that, right? So that would count as a crime, destruction of property that was ideologically motivated, meant to threaten or coerce people of the Jewish faith.
Was it ideologically motivated, or was it some misguided college kids? Or can you actually find the person that did it? You really can't tell, can you?
Yeah, I mean, when you're using language to threaten or coerce, anti-Semitic language, I would say that would be ideologically motivated. They're not just saying like all college students; they're targeting a specific type. No,
I know, but I guess I'm just thinking of stupid kids, stupid kids that have a computer, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to excuse that behavior.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like I guess I'm just trying to say, is that some terrorist trying to scare people, or just some drunk frat boys said, "Hey, look what I can do"?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know. I think what we do at NCITE is we really look at the spectrum of what it means to be a terrorist, right? And so, all the way up from an orchestrated plot that would, kill hundreds of thousands of people like what we saw on 9/11, to an individual lone actor who might be inspired by some rhetoric he's read online or on a gaming platform, and want to do something with more impact. And so to me, and as an academic, we would say that's a still terrorist behavior. It's just on a different end of the spectrum.
Let's talk about other forms of the internet and how it affects terrorism. Do people seek that out, or do the terrorists seek them out? In other words, are somebody in there doodling anti-Semitic behavior, and then they get a terrorist group in there. Terrorist group finds them, or how do you? Because I'm not on the dark web. I don't. I'm not into all that stuff. So, explain to me, like, how they find these people and how then you find them.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, going to these kind of unregulated platforms or spaces. So, like we talked about, gaming adjacent platforms. So there's very little regulation. So, like, if you were to type something on Facebook or Twitter that looked like you were attached to a foreign terrorist organization, you would get you would set off a lot of alarms from a lot of people. If you're on Twitch or Steam or any of these platforms that may not have the same level of regulation or scrutiny, these sort of decentralized gaming platforms, it's very easy for those kinds of individuals to chat and recruit and find you. So it's not like our kids are out like, how do I join a terrorist group? That's usually not how it works. It usually works with them stumbling across, talking with people. Maybe they say an anti-Semitic slur while they're in a game, and then they see that they're kind of testing to see if you actually commit to it or not.
And so then they see that and say, hey, a bunch of us are all getting together for some beers, over at this meeting hall. Come and join us.
Yeah.
And then they start just befriending them and then bring them into the group. Is that?
Yeah, and honestly, there's a lot of similarity with how people recruit for foreign terrorist organizations as well as these domestic violent extremist groups. And it is very similar to what you're just describing, where it's like, seems very innocuous at first, where you're just chatting and talking, and then all of a sudden you start talking to them more and more, and it seems exciting, and you get swept up into something that you didn't necessarily think you would.
What could parents, spouses, brothers, and sisters do if they see a family member getting into this sort of thing? How do they? Are there tricks to help them stop it? Do you hold an intervention? How do you? What should family members do if they see something like this happening?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, we just wrapped up a project. It was a researcher from University of Maine, and she interviewed parents and siblings of people who'd gotten recruited into terrorist groups, and to ask them, like, what were some of the barriers to why you didn't report? What did you see? And a few things that we learned from that was that there are organizations out there to help parents. One is called Parents for Peace. One is called Life After Hate. Unfortunately, there's needs for these nonprofit organizations to exist to help parents to understand what the warning signs are, but like also how to start those conversations. Because to be candid, it's very seldom a family member is going to call like the FBI or the police and say, I think my son's joining ISIS, or I think my son is, thinking about assassinating President Trump, right? Like no one wants to think that about their kids, and nor would they necessarily call the police as their first line of defense. So there are organizations that exist out there that are out there to help you start those conversations and to see some of the warning signs.
Wow. You said you got some students that are embedded in some of these terrorist groups.
Not students. I've got, they're actually faculty members.
Okay, faculty members are embedded in this. How do you know they're not going to succumb to the rhetoric and succumb to that and become terrorists themselves? Is that a real danger? Do you do like periodic checkups with them to see how they're doing?
Yeah, so we have a couple of, and it's the same with people that are monitoring the social media, right? You're consuming so much hate content online. And so we actually sponsored a project last year about like resilience for counterterrorism researchers who are consuming this information. And it's not about worrying that they will get radicalized. It's more worried about that they might have something called vicarious trauma. So it's, probably akin to people in the journalism and, like if you think about war photographers or people that have to observe atrocities. And there are some interesting techniques that they use to overcome it. One is to see like what they're doing and how it ties to actually having fight terrorism. And that can help them to like get over that vicarious trauma, as opposed to like feeling like they're just studying it and it's helpless and there's nothing they can do. But the other piece is, I've had it with at least 2 different researchers that we funded in our consortium where I've noticed, hey, maybe it's time you switch your topic and just take a break from talking to them, because it can be just to have that kind of hate spewed at you all the time can be just really sad.
Well, I know, myself, I was in talk radio for a number of years, and I was very active on, I thought, naively that, you could actually have like conversations on Facebook and social media to maybe, have intelligent conversations and, change people's minds maybe. I found myself getting, some really nasty hate and stuff, and then it made me angry and made me, and so I very rarely put anything political or anything on my social media now, because it just it doesn't solve anything. It's not healthy. And I, especially like during a political campaign, I've got a policy on my page, no memes. Because a meme, a meme will get somebody more emotionally involved than just like a paragraph, right?
Yeah, we actually had a whole panel last year, terrorist use of memes. Because what's interesting too is law enforcement, they have all these kinds of like, different natural language processing where you can see keywords if people use anti-Semitic words or Islamophobic words, words that they've used.
Yeah.
You can't do that with images. It's so interesting because they don't have the same software capabilities to like identify what like a terrorist meme looks like even. And so we had a whole session about terrorist use of memes and what it does psychologically to someone, because it makes them feel like they're in the in-group, like they're the only ones that understand like what Pepe Le Frog is, or and it's like it's an interesting psychological phenomenon when you consume a meme or you share a meme.
Yeah, and there's a whole subculture for that. And they know what it is, but like the average person doesn't.
Right. There's a lot of coded language. Yep.
Now, you mentioned Pepe the Frog. I remember that being a thing like, 4 years ago or so.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I've seen a Pepe the Frog or heard about Pepe the Frog in 3.5 years.
Okay.
Do these sort of things just sort of hit for a while and then go away and then some other image?
And that's part of it, right? Is like to be the newest meme and to have one that, or a take on a new meme and to have new imagery that's coming out as well.
Yeah. So. That's where the hot 200-year-old comes in, I guess. But that's another form of terrorism. We don't need to be getting into that. All right. So this has always been fascinating to me, and I think it would drive me crazy if I was, doing what you do. I had a friend who used to work for LinkedIn, and his job was to find like all the undercurrent stuff on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I mean, I go on LinkedIn, and all I see are people talking about job promotions and, but there's a whole subculture in there too with, pornography and angry racist stuff and he said he couldn't take it anymore. Wow. He couldn't do that. So that's like, even like with Twitter and stuff. I mean, I know that there's stuff out there that I probably don't want to see, but it's out there for anybody else that wants to see, right? I mean, how hard is it to find this stuff if you're really looking for it?
I would say the students in our consortium are really good at finding it. Unfortunately, they come across it a lot with the different platforms they're on. A lot of the unregulated platforms have it more like Reddit. Like it doesn't have a lot of it's difficult to regulate that, and so it's not going to have as much kind of red flags being taken down the way you would have like X or Facebook or Instagram.
Now, you've got a website that people can go to and find out more about NCITE.
Mm-hmm.
What else do we need to know about this? But we're wrapping things up here. What else do we need to know about what it is, how Omaha's involved, and what maybe the average citizen can do to help fight terrorism?
Yeah, so we have a webinar series that we are doing definitely every month, but sometimes twice a month. Like we just did one last week about behavioral threat assessment teams. We featured a school in Tempe, or a police department in Tempe, Arizona, and the person at Department of Homeland Security and like what they do to keep schools safe from terrorist attacks, which was really, I think, interesting. And I think it would have a lot of interest for your listeners to be able to see what resources there are available. We had one a couple of weeks ago, even before that, which was terrorist use of improvised explosive devices. We did a large report about that for the federal government about like the 10 challenges of how law enforcement needs to tackle the counter IED threat because terrorists are using improvised explosive devices, bombs, in new and different ways. So I think just going to our website and poking around and looking to see when those, sign up for our listserv, seeing when those webinars are going to be. I think one of the reasons I wanted it to be in Nebraska is for people that were outside of the Beltway to recognize that actually we're the strongest defense against terrorism in our country. And there are things that we can do in the United States that the federal government just can't. And what our role is, U.S. citizens could be in helping to prevent terrorist attacks in our communities. So I really wanted it to be about community safety, not necessarily just national security, but like how you keep your community safe.
I would imagine Omaha is a target, right? I mean, how big of a target are we?
Well, I think every metropolitan city is a target. I'm to be candid, and this is probably my bias, but we have these Fortune 500 companies that have lots of people who love them, more people that love them than don't. But if you think about, UP as a transportation target, terrorists love attacking transportation targets. There's lots of psychological reasons probably why they do, but that is certainly something that I get concerned about. I also get concerned about our energy sector, right? We talked about left-leaning or eco-climate terrorists. So you think about all the energy companies, Tenaska, Berkshire Energy, that are here, and that they could be a target as well. And then, you just look at U.S. Strategic Command is here. I mean, that's a very hard target. We have things like the College World Series, which is a very important soft target. And so
Berkshire Hathaway
meeting that's here with all of these wealthy CEOs that come and investors that come. And so for me, I think it's just being aware that even though we don't like to think about terrorists, they always are thinking about us. And so how do we remind ourselves that we are our best part of the defense or the sentries of our community and how we keep ourselves safe?
Well, make sure that you and your students and your staff take care of yourselves, because we need people like you out there doing this and fighting this and finding out more about it to help prevent these terrorist attacks. Doctor, thank you very much for your time. This is fascinating. I could talk to you all day, but we only got so much time. So I really do appreciate your time. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, every Tuesday, 10 a.m., a new podcast comes out. Make sure you like us, subscribe, and all that. And then check out every week, interesting people, different conversations, a little bit of everything. If you haven't checked out the interviews we did with the homeless people, that's very interesting. We've got find out more about the streetcar. That's up there, and lots of other stuff on the WWT webpage. Just check out the podcast. You'll be able to see everything we got on Becca's Talking. Till next time, take care.